Hana sat at her console in the Deep Space Monitoring Station New Seoul and watched the endless stream of data flowing across her screens. Most days brought nothing but static from the void between stars, background noise from distant galaxies, and the occasional automated beacon from cargo ships. She had been doing this job for 3 years now and could tell the difference between a solar flare and an engine malfunction from the sound alone. The signal that came through at 0347 hours was different. It was weak and broken, cutting in and out like someone desperately trying to reach through interference. Hana adjusted her headset and leaned forward, her fingers dancing across the controls to clean up the transmission. What she heard made her blood run cold. "Please, and anyone. They are killing us, taking our children." The voice was high and musical, speaking in broken galactic standard with an accent she had never heard before. "We are peaceful people. We have done nothing wrong. They harvest us like animals. Please help." The signal faded into static. Hana tried to boost the gain, to pull more from the transmission, but it was gone. She sat back in her chair and stared at the screen, her heart pounding. In all her years of monitoring deep space communications, she had never received a distress call like this. She replayed the recording 3 times before reaching for her communicator. Station Commander Park needed to hear this immediately. 20 minutes later, the signal had been transmitted to Earthfleet Command and every major human military installation in known space. The message was clear enough. Somewhere out there, an entire species was crying for help while something terrible was happening to them. Captain Minho received the transmission aboard his heavy cruiser Thunderstrike while conducting routine patrol near the Centauri border. He was a veteran of 15 years in the Earth Fleet, had fought pirates and smugglers, and had seen his share of violence. But something about this particular distress call bothered him in a way he could not explain. His communications officer, Lieutenant Commander Jisoo, was already running analysis on the signal when Minho reached the bridge. She looked up as he approached her station, her face grim. "Sir, I have been able to trace the origin point," she said, bringing up a holographic star map. "The signal came from the Vega system, approximately 26 light-years from our current position." Minho studied the map. Vega was on the edge of known space, in a region that had only recently been explored by human survey teams. According to their databases, the system contained several habitable worlds, but no major civilizations were supposed to be living there. "What do we know about this species?" Minho asked. Jisoo pulled up another display showing linguistic analysis. "Based on the vocal patterns and language structure, I believe they are calling themselves the Kalari. Cross-referencing with Galactic Council databases. Here." An image appeared showing tall, slender beings with large eyes and delicate features. The Kalari are listed as a peaceful species known for their art and music. They have no military to speak of and are considered completely non-threatening by galactic standards. Minho felt his jaw tighten. A peaceful species with no weapons, crying for help while someone was harvesting them. The word harvest kept echoing in his mind, and he did not like the images it brought up. "Sir," Jisoo continued, "I have been monitoring Galactic Council communications about this situation. They received the same distress call we did, but their response has been disappointing." She brought up the official Galactic Council statement. Minho read it twice before the bureaucratic language really sank in. The Council was calling for a measured response through proper diplomatic channels, and wanted to investigate the situation thoroughly before taking any action that might destabilize the region. In other words, they were going to let the Kalari die while they held committee meetings. "How long will their investigation take?" Minho asked, though he already knew the answer would make him angry. "Based on previous council actions, sir, anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. Minho stared at the star map showing the Vega system. Somewhere out there, an entire civilization was being systematically destroyed, while the galaxy's governing body worried about paperwork and political consequences. He thought about his own daughter back on Earth, safe in her school, learning about art and music just like the Kalari children who were being taken from their families. The decision formed in his mind like a cold, hard stone. "Open a channel to Admiral Do-hyun at Terra Defense Command," he ordered. The connection took several minutes to establish across the light years. When Admiral Do-hyun's weathered face appeared on the main screen, Minho could see that the older man had already heard about the Kalari distress call. "Captain," Do-hyun said without preamble, "I assume you are calling about the situation in the Vega system." "Yes, sir. I am requesting permission to investigate and render assistance." Do-hyun was quiet for a moment, studying Minho's face across the void. "You know that the Galactic Council has asked all member species to stand down while they conduct their investigation." "I am aware of their position, sir. And you know that if we act without Council approval, it could have serious diplomatic consequences for humanity's standing in the galactic community." Minho thought about the voice on the transmission, desperate and broken, begging for someone to help. "Sir, with respect, there are some things more important than diplomatic standing." A thin smile crossed Admiral Do-hyun's face. "Captain, you are absolutely correct. Consider yourself authorized to investigate the Vega system and render whatever assistance you deem necessary." The transmission ended and Minho turned to his crew. Every officer on the bridge was looking at him with the same expression. They had all heard the distress call, and they all knew what they were about to do. "Navigation, set course for the Vega system, maximum speed," Minho ordered. "Communications, send a message to Fleet Command. Tell them the Deathworlders are going to war." As the Thunderstrike turned toward Vega and engaged its faster-than-light drive, Minho sent out another series of messages. These went to every human military commander within 50 light-years of their position. The messages were short and direct. Peaceful species under attack, requesting immediate assistance, rules of engagement to be determined upon arrival. Within 6 hours, 17 human warships had changed course toward Vega. Within 12 hours, that number had grown to 43. By the end of the day, over 200 human vessels were converging on the system, ranging from massive dreadnoughts to small patrol ships whose captains could not stomach the thought of letting innocents die. The galaxy had never seen humanity mobilize like this before. In their brief time as members of the galactic community, humans had been careful to follow the rules, to respect diplomatic protocols, to prove they could be civilized. But the Kalari distress call had awakened something deep in the human psyche, something that cared more about right and wrong than about politics and procedures. Admiral Do-hyun stood in his command center on Earth and watched the tactical display as human ships from across known space began their journey toward Vega. His aide Commander Suho approached with the latest reports. "Sir, we have confirmations from battle groups at Proxima, Wolf, and Barnard stations. Total commitment is now 216 vessels, including 12 dreadnoughts." Do-hyun nodded slowly. It was the largest military force humanity had ever assembled, and they were taking it to war based on a single desperate transmission from a species they had never met. "Sir," Suho continued quietly, "the other galactic powers are starting to take notice. The Altarian Republic is asking questions, and the Centauri Federation wants to know why we are moving so many ships toward their border region." "Tell them the truth," Do-hyun replied. "Someone is committing genocide and we are going to stop it." As the human fleet continued its journey toward Vega, the galaxy began to understand that something fundamental had changed. The newcomers from the small blue planet, the ones who had been so careful to follow all the rules and respect all the traditions, had just declared that some things were more important than galactic politics. The Deathworlders were coming, and they were bringing everything they had. Zira pressed her back against the cold stone wall of the underground cavern and listened to the sounds of death echoing from above. The harvesting machines had been working for 3 days now, their mechanical whining mixing with the screams of her people as they were processed. She closed her large eyes and tried not to think about what was happening to the children who had been taken in the first wave of attacks. The Kalari had never known war. For thousands of years, her people had lived in harmony with their world and each other, creating art and music that touched the souls of every species that encountered it. They had no weapons because they had never needed weapons. Violence was something that happened to other species, in other places, far from their peaceful worlds. That had been their mistake. Zira opened her eyes and looked around the cavern at the 43 survivors huddled in the darkness. They were all that remained of New Harmony City, which had housed nearly 2 million Kalari just a week ago. Old Keeper Nalo sat in the corner, his once bright eyes now dim with shock and grief. Young Lyra clung to her mother Vera, both of them trembling with fear and hunger. Above them the sound stopped suddenly. Zira held her breath, hoping it meant the harvesters had finished and moved on. But she knew better. The silence meant they were bringing in new equipment, preparing for the next phase of their operation. Soon they would start scanning for underground shelters, and this temporary refuge would become another processing site. Keeper Nalo, Zira whispered, crawling across the cave floor to the old scholar. Do you understand what they are? What they want from us? Nalo looked at her with eyes that had seen too much horror. They call themselves Vakari, he said in a voice barely above a whisper. I heard their leader speaking during the first attack. They are not just killing us, child, they are stealing from us. Zira did not understand. Stealing what? We gave them everything we had when they first demanded tribute. Not our possessions, Nalo said sadly. Our minds, our creativity, our ability to dream and imagine and create beauty. They have technology that can extract and absorb the neural patterns of living beings. Every time they harvest one of us, they become a little more like us but without our compassion or our peace. The truth hit Zira like a physical blow. The Vakari were not just killing her people, they were stealing their very essence, their souls, and adding that stolen creativity to their own brutal intelligence. Far above the hidden caverns, HFY, Thakmor stood on the command deck of his flagship and watched the final phases of the Kalari harvest operation. 18 processing stations now orbited the planet, each one filled with neural extraction equipment and holding thousands of Kalari specimens. The operation was proceeding exactly as planned. Thakmor was proud of his efficiency. The Vakari Syndicate had been conquering and harvesting species for over 2 centuries, and he had personally overseen the absorption of 12 different civilizations. Each conquered species made the Vakari stronger, more intelligent, more capable. The Kalari, with their exceptional artistic abilities and highly developed creative neural networks, would be his greatest prize yet. His tactical officer, SciFiPrime, Grektor, approached with the latest reports. HFY, the deep scanning equipment has detected several underground shelter sites. We estimate another 12,000 specimens in hiding. Excellent, Thakmor replied, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction. Begin excavation procedures. I want every Kalari processed before the end of the cycle. Grektor hesitated. HFY, we have also detected several unidentified vessels approaching the system. Long-range sensors indicate they are of unknown configuration. Thakmor turned to study the tactical display. 7 ships were indeed approaching from the direction of Galactic Center, their design unlike anything in his databases. According to the sensor readings, they were primitive constructions, metal hulls with basic fusion drives and simple weapon systems. Have you identified the species? He asked. The ships are broadcasting identification codes indicating they are from a species called humans, Grektor reported. Database cross-reference shows they are a recently spacefaring race from a moderate threat world. They joined the Galactic Council only 60 standard years ago. Thakmor felt a mixture of amusement and irritation. Another group of galactic do-gooders, probably coming to negotiate for the Kalari or to file some sort of official protest. He had dealt with dozens of such interventions over the years. Most species backed down when they saw the size of a Vakari battle fleet. The few that did not were usually conquered and absorbed themselves. What is their estimated time of arrival? He asked. Approximately 6 standard hours, HFY. Thakmor nodded. That would give him time to finish processing the current batch of Kalari and prepare a proper demonstration of Vakari military power. These humans would see what happened to species that interfered with Syndicate operations. Continue the harvest, he ordered, and prepare the battle fleet for a minor engagement. We will send these humans away with a clear understanding of their place in the galactic order. Captain Kaiwan sat in the command chair of his stealth frigate Soul's Vengeance and studied the intelligence reports flowing in from his ship's advanced sensor arrays. What he was seeing in the Vega system made his stomach turn with disgust and rage. The Vakari had built orbital processing stations around the main Kalari world. Each station was the size of a small city and filled with machinery designed for one purpose: the systematic extraction and processing of living beings. Kiwan could see transport ships moving back and forth between the planet's surface and the stations, carrying their cargo of terrified Kalari to be processed. His intelligence officer, Lieutenant Jamin, was compiling detailed scans of the operation. "Sir, based on energy signatures and transport patterns, I estimate they have already processed approximately 4 million Kalari. The remaining population appears to be concentrated in several urban areas that are being systematically cleared." Kiwan felt his hands clench into fists. 4 million people murdered for their creativity and intelligence. The Vakari were not just committing genocide. They were committing the worst kind of genocide, one that sought to steal the very essence of their victims. "Any sign of resistance from the Kalari?" he asked. "None, sir. They appear to be a completely pacifist species with no military capability whatsoever. They are essentially defenseless against this kind of attack." Kiwan nodded grimly. That explained why the Vakari had chosen them. Predators always went after the weakest prey first. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "I am picking up a transmission from the Vakari command ship. They are demanding that we identify ourselves and state our business in this system." Kiwan considered his options. The Soul's Vengeance was designed for reconnaissance and intelligence gathering, not direct combat. His orders were to observe and report back to the main fleet. But looking at the screens showing the ongoing massacre of innocent people, he found it hard to stick to protocol. "Open a channel," he ordered. The main screen flickered and showed the armored face of a Vakari warrior. Thakmor studied Kiwan with eyes that held no trace of compassion or mercy. "I am Warprime Thakmor of the Vakari Syndicate," the alien said in accented galactic standard. "You are trespassing in a legal salvage operation. Identify yourself and depart immediately or face the consequences." Kiwan looked at the Vakari commander and felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. "I am Captain Kiwan of the United Earthship Soul's Vengeance, and what you are doing here is not salvage. It is murder." Thakmor's mandibles spread in what might have been a smile. The Kalari are a conquered species. Their neural patterns and biological resources now belong to the Syndicate by right of conquest. If your government wishes to file a formal protest, they may do so through proper diplomatic channels. "There will be no diplomatic channels," Kiwan said quietly. "There will be no negotiations. What you have done to these people is an abomination, and we are here to stop it." "You?" Thakmor laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "One primitive ship against the entire Third Harvest fleet? You are either very brave or very stupid, human." Kiwan looked at his sensor display showing the 18 processing stations, each one filled with innocent people being murdered for their thoughts and dreams. "I am about to show you the difference." He cut the transmission and turned to his communications officer. "Send a coded message to Admiral Dohyun. Single word: abomination." The message shot across space faster than light, carrying with it everything that word meant to the human military. Not just murder, not just war crimes, but something so fundamentally evil that it required the complete and total destruction of everyone involved. Back on the Vakari flagship, Thakmor was studying reports of additional human ships entering the system. The count had grown from 7 to 12 to 23, and more were arriving every hour. According to his intelligence officer, over 200 human vessels were now approaching Vega. "Warprime," Grector said nervously. "Perhaps we should contact Syndicate High Command for reinforcements." Thakmor waved dismissively. 200 primitive ships against the Third Harvest fleet? We have conquered entire star systems with less firepower than we have right here. He looked at the tactical display showing his own forces. 47 major warships include. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Vega system like a swarm of angry hornets. Admiral Do-hyun stood on the bridge of his flagship, indomitable, and watched the tactical display populate with enemy contacts. 47 major Vakari warships plus their processing stations, a formidable force by any galactic standard. War Prime Thakmor had been expecting a negotiation. What he got instead was a declaration of war broadcast on all frequencies. "This is Admiral Do-hyun of the Terra Defense Fleet." The human commander's voice echoed across space in perfect galactic standard. "You have exactly 1 hour to cease all operations against the Kalari people. Release all prisoners and surrender yourselves for war crimes prosecution. This is your only warning." Thakmor responded immediately from his command ship. "Admiral, you are outnumbered and outgunned. My forces have conquered 17 star systems. Your primitive technology poses no threat to Syndicate vessels." Do-hyun's reply came back cold and flat. "We did not come here to threaten you. We came here to destroy you." The first shots were fired by the Vakari, as expected. Their tactical doctrine called for long-range engagement with precise energy weapons designed to disable enemy ships, while minimizing damage to potentially valuable salvage. It was how civilized species conducted warfare, controlled, calculated, with room for surrender and negotiation. What happened next shattered every assumption the Vakari had about combat. Captain Yong-ho's destroyer Incheon Strike was the first human ship to enter weapons range. Instead of returning fire at long distance, he accelerated directly toward the nearest Vakari cruiser at maximum thrust. His weapons officer, Lieutenant Sunwoo, fired everything they had, not at the enemy ship's engines or weapons, but at their life support systems and crew quarters. The Vakari cruiser Bone Harvester exploded in a massive fireball that lit up half the system. There had been no time to evacuate, no opportunity to surrender, no warning beyond the human declaration of war. 800 Vakari warriors died in seconds. Thakmor stared at his tactical display in shock. No galactic military attacked like that, with such speed, such violence, such complete disregard for the accepted rules of engagement. "What kind of madness is this?" he muttered. His question was answered when Major Hyejeon's assault transport locked onto Processing Station Alpha 7 and began a direct boarding action. The station's commander, expecting a standard negotiation for prisoner exchange, found himself facing humans who fought like nothing he had ever encountered. Hyejeon's Marines did not capture strategic positions and wait for surrender. They moved through the station like a tide of destruction, using weapons that had been banned by most galactic civilizations for being too brutal. Explosive rounds designed to cause maximum trauma, plasma cutters that could slice through both armor and flesh, and close combat weapons that turned corridor fighting into butchery. But the real horror for the Vakari came when they realized the humans were not just trying to win, they were trying to save every single Kalari prisoner, even if it meant dying in the process. Sergeant Minsik threw himself in front of a harvesting machine to protect a group of Kalari children, taking a plasma blast that should have killed him instantly. He kept fighting with third-degree burns covering half his body, cutting down Vakari guards with a combat knife, while screaming for his squad to get the children to safety. The Kalari prisoners watched in amazement and terror as these alien warriors fought with a ferocity that seemed to come from some primal place deeper than strategy or tactics. They fought like parents protecting their young, like people defending their homes, like beings who would rather die than allow innocents to be harmed. Commander Tae-hyung of the destroyer Busan's Wrath was implementing what humans called total warfare doctrine against the Vakari logistics network. While other galactic species considered supply lines and civilian infrastructure to be off-limits in military engagements, humans made no such distinction. Every Vakari supply depot was destroyed. Every communication relay was targeted. Every fuel station, repair facility, and cargo transport was eliminated with ruthless efficiency. Tae-hyung did not just want to defeat the enemy fleet. He wanted to ensure they could never threaten anyone again. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "the Vakari commander is broadcasting on all frequencies, demanding we follow civilized rules of engagement." Tae-hyung looked at his screen showing the processing stations where millions of Kalari had been murdered and harvested. "Tell him we will follow the same rules they used on the children." The human fleet moved through the Vakari forces like a natural disaster. Ships that had been designed for careful, controlled combat found themselves facing enemies who seemed to view dying as an acceptable price for victory. Human captains rammed their vessels into Vakari dreadnoughts while their crews evacuated in assault pods that immediately began boarding actions on the ships they had just crashed into. Captain Sujin of the cruiser Gwangju's Revenge coordinated with Marine Commander Dongyun to turn her entire ship into a kinetic weapon. As the Gwangju's Revenge plowed into the side of a Vakari battleship, Dongyun's Marines deployed directly from the wreckage into the enemy vessel's corridors, turning the collision site into an instant boarding action. The Vakari had fought Deathworld species before. The Krathari were vicious reptilian warriors who could tear through battle armor with their claws. But even the Krathari had followed basic military logic. They wanted to win battles and preserve their own forces. These humans fought like they had already accepted death and were only concerned with how much damage they could do before dying. It was a level of tactical insanity that no galactic military had ever encountered or prepared for. War Prime Thakmor found himself facing something he had never experienced in 2 centuries of conquest: genuine fear. His forces were being systematically destroyed by an enemy that fought with no regard for their own survival. Worse, the humans were broadcasting continuous updates of their rescue operations, showing the galaxy exactly what the Vakari had been doing to the Kalari. "Subprime Grektor," he called to his tactical officer. "How many of our ships remain operational?" Grektor checked his displays with shaking hands. "War Prime, we have lost 26 major vessels. Our processing stations are under constant attack, and the humans are extracting prisoners faster than we can relocate them." Takamor looked at the tactical display showing human ships swarming through his fleet like parasites, each one willing to sacrifice itself to destroy Vakari vessels or rescue Kalari prisoners. "What is their casualty rate?" "Unknown, sir. They do not appear to be tracking losses in any way we can understand. Ships that are damaged beyond repair simply ram into our vessels, while their crews evacuate to continue fighting." The War Prime had conquered 17 star systems using standard galactic military doctrine. He understood ship-to-ship combat, strategic positioning, and the careful calculation of acceptable losses versus strategic gains. What he could not understand was an enemy that treated every single prisoner as worth more than an entire starship. Major Hyejin was leading her 3rd boarding action of the day when she finally came face-to-face with a Vakari subprime in the control center of Processing Station Beta 4. The alien commander was standing over a group of Kalari youngsters who could not have been more than children by any species standards. "Human," the subprime hissed, his weapon trained on the children. "Retreat, or I will execute these specimens." Hyejin looked at the Kalari children, their large eyes wide with terror, and felt something cold and final settle in her chest. "Do you know what we call beings that threaten children?" she asked quietly. "What?" the subprime demanded. "Dead," Hyejin replied, and moved faster than the Vakari's enhanced reflexes could follow. Her plasma cutter took his head off before he could pull the trigger. As she knelt beside the terrified Kalari children, speaking to them in gentle tones while her squad secured the area, the youngest Kalari looked up at her with wonder and asked a question in his musical language that she somehow understood without translation. "Are you monsters too?" Hyejin looked at this innocent child who had seen nothing but horror for days and realized that to him all aliens probably looked like monsters now. "No, little one," she said softly. "We are the monsters that eat other monsters." Across the battlefield, the Vakari were beginning to understand that they had made a terrible mistake. They had attacked a species under the protection of Deathworlders, and now those Deathworlders were showing them the difference between conquest and extermination. Admiral Dohyun received reports from across his fleet. Processing stations captured, Kalari prisoners rescued by the thousands, Vakari vessels destroyed, or fleeing. But he also received the casualty reports, and each one hit him like a physical blow. Human ships destroyed, brave crews dead, Marines who had died protecting children they had never met. "Admiral," his communications officer reported, "we are receiving surrender offers from several Vakari vessels." Do-hyun thought about the millions of Kalari who had been processed, their creativity and dreams stolen and consumed by these creatures. He thought about the children who had died in terror, while their minds were Harva. Supreme War Prime Gorthok received the distress call from the Vega system while reviewing conquest plans for his next harvest operation. The transmission from his subordinate Thakmor was broken and desperate, cutting in and out through the interference of active combat. Supreme War Prime. Human forces. Unprecedented aggression. Request immediate reinforcement. They fight like transmission lost. Gorthok stared at the communication console in disbelief. The Third Harvest Fleet was one of the most powerful military formations in Syndicate history, with enough firepower to conquer entire star systems. The idea that a single species could threaten such a force was almost impossible to believe. But Gorthok had not survived 3 centuries of conquest by ignoring intelligence reports. He immediately ordered his first battle fleet to the Vega system. 60 major warships, including his personal super dreadnought Apex Predator, supported by hundreds of smaller vessels, and the crown jewel of Syndicate military technology, Trophy, ships crewed by warriors from conquered species. The fleet that jumped into the Vega system 12 hours later was a monument to Vakari dominance. Ship after ship emerged from hyperspace, their hulls decorated with the bones of harvested species, their weapons charged and ready for battle. Gorthok had brought enough firepower to sterilize entire worlds. What he found waiting for him was the wreckage of the Third Harvest Fleet scattered across space like debris from a shattered moon. Processing stations hung broken and dead in orbit around the Kalari homeworld. 47 Vakari warships had been reduced to 17 burning hulks, and even those were being systematically torn apart by human boarding parties who showed no interest in taking prisoners. Communications, Gorthok ordered, his voice tight with controlled rage. Open a channel to the human commander. Admiral Do-hyun's face appeared on the main screen, and Gorthok found himself looking at something he had never expected to see, an enemy who showed no fear, no respect, and no willingness to negotiate. The human admiral looked like he was already planning Gorthok's funeral. I am Supreme War Prime Gorthok of the Vakari Syndicate, he announced with all the authority. Of 3 centuries of successful conquest, I offer you terms for withdrawal from this system. Cease hostilities immediately, and I will allow your forces to depart with minimal casualties. Do-hyun studied the massive Vakari fleet that had just arrived and seemed entirely unimpressed by its size. We are not here to negotiate with child killers. You have one opportunity to surrender for war crimes prosecution. That is the only offer you will receive. Gorthok felt his mandibles click with anger. No species had ever spoken to him like this, with such casual dismissal of his power. Human, you are outnumbered 3-1 by the finest military force in the galaxy. I have conquered the Krathari Deathworlders, absorbed their strength, and added their warriors to my own forces. What makes you think your primitive ships can stand against such power? The human admiral's expression did not change. We are about to show you the difference between conquerors and exterminators. The channel closed, and Gorthok found himself staring at a blank screen. In all his years of warfare, no enemy had ever refused his offer of terms. No species had ever looked at his overwhelming force and chosen certain death over surrender. Colonel Nara was coordinating the final evacuation of Kalari survivors from the planet's surface when the Vakari reinforcements arrived. Her transport ships were loaded with rescued prisoners, many of them so traumatized they could barely speak. She had seen the harvesting chambers, the neural extraction equipment, the processing lines where sentient beings were reduced to raw material. When her communications officer reported the arrival of the Syndicate battle fleet, Nara felt a cold satisfaction settle in her chest. Good. Now they could finish what the Vakari had started. All units, she broadcast to her ground forces. Priority Alpha is complete evacuation of all Kalari survivors. Priority Beta is documentation and preservation of evidence. Priority Gamma is the elimination of all Vakari presence on this world. Hercule, Marines had been working around the clock to rescue prisoners and document the atrocities they found. Every harvesting facility, every processing chamber, every piece of equipment designed to extract neural patterns from living beings was being recorded and transmitted to every major government in the galaxy. The footage was horrifying. Kalari, children strapped to extraction tables while machines slowly drained the creativity from their minds. Artists and musicians reduced to empty shells as their life's work was stolen and absorbed by their captors. Entire families processed together while Vakari technicians discussed the quality of their neural patterns like they were evaluating livestock. But Nara made sure the galaxy also saw something else. Human Marines carrying wounded Kalari to safety, medics treating alien children with the same care they would give their own, soldiers dying to protect people they had never met from a species they had only just discovered. The space battle that erupted above the planet was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Gorthak expected the humans to retreat when faced with his overwhelming numbers. Instead, they attacked with even greater ferocity than before. Captain Yongho's destroyer Incheon Strike coordinated with Marine Commander Sunwoo to implement a tactic that defied every principle of civilized warfare. As the Incheon Strike accelerated toward the massive syndicate dreadnought Pain Eternal, Sunwoo's Marines prepared for what they called a kinetic boarding action. The destroyer struck the enemy ship at maximum velocity while simultaneously deploying every assault pod and boarding torpedo in its arsenal. The collision tore both ships apart. But Sunwoo's Marines were already inside the Vakari vessel, fighting their way toward critical systems while their own ship died around them. Gorthak watched in amazement and horror as human after human chose certain death rather than allow his forces to regroup. Ships that should have retreated instead rammed into his larger vessels. Marines that should have surrendered when outnumbered instead fought until the last soldier fell. Pilots who should have ejected when their fighters were crippled instead turned their dying craft into guided missiles aimed at Syndicate command centers. Supreme War Prime, his tactical officer reported in a shaking voice. The humans are broadcasting something on all frequencies. Gorthak ordered it put on the main screen and found himself watching footage from inside a Vakari processing station. The images showed Kalari children being systematically harvested, while Syndicate technicians discussed the efficiency of their neural extraction procedures. The camera work was steady and professional, clearly taken by human forces during their boarding actions. "This is what we found." Admiral Doyun's voice accompanied the horrific footage. "This is what the Vakari Syndicate does to peaceful species. This is why they will be completely eliminated." The transmission was going out on every communication frequency in known space, reaching every inhabited world in the galaxy. The galactic community was seeing exactly what the Syndicate had been doing for centuries, and they were seeing how humanity responded to such atrocities. Gorthak felt something he had not experienced in 3 centuries of conquest. Fear of complete defeat. Not just military defeat, but the kind of total destruction that left nothing behind but scattered atoms and bitter memories. Major Hyejin was leading the assault on Gorthak's flagship when she encountered something that made her understand the true scope of Vakari evil. Deep in the ship's core, she found the trophy chambers, vast halls filled with the preserved neural patterns of every species the Syndicate had conquered. Thousands of different alien minds, their thoughts and dreams and creativity trapped in crystalline matrices, their consciousness preserved like insects in amber. The Vakari had not just killed these species. They had enslaved their very souls, keeping them aware and conscious, while forcing them to contribute to Syndicate operations. Among the trapped minds, Hyejin found the Krathari warriors that Gorthak had bragged about conquering. Proud reptilian fighters who had been reduced to living weapons, their combat instincts harvested and used against other species. Their eyes still held awareness, still held rage at what had been done to them. "Can you understand me?" Hyejin asked one of the preserved Krathari minds. The crystalline matrix pulsed with effort, and words appeared on a nearby display in broken galactic standard. "Free. Us. Make. Them. Pay." Hyejin looked around the chamber at thousands of alien minds trapped in eternal slavery, and felt her anger transform into something cold and absolute. "We will," she promised. "And we will make sure this never happens to anyone else." The battle reached its climax when Gorthak himself, surrounded by the wreckage of his once mighty fleet, made a final desperate gambit. He activated his ship's self-destruct system and broadcast a message to the remaining human forces. "Humans," he announced with the last of his arrogance, "you may destroy my fleet, but you cannot destroy the Syndicate. We have harvested hundreds of species across the galaxy. Even if you kill me, others will continue our work." Admiral Do-hyun's response came back immediately, and it carried a weight that made every surviving Vakari warrior understand their fate. "Supreme War Prime Gorthak," Do-hyun said quietly, "you are correct that we cannot destroy your entire syndicate today. But we see 6 months after the Battle of Vega, the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Vakari Syndicate, which had terrorized peaceful species for over 2 centuries, no longer existed. Not defeated, not scattered, not driven into hiding, completely eliminated from the universe with a thoroughness that made even hardened military leaders uncomfortable. Zira stood before the Galactic Council on Nexus Prime and tried to find words to describe what she had witnessed. As the sole surviving Kalari government official, she had been chosen to represent her people in the aftermath of the human intervention. Behind her sat nearly 2 million rescued Kalari, the survivors of what should have been a complete extinction event. "Honored counselors," she began in her musical voice, "I speak for a people who should not exist. By every calculation, every projection, every precedent in galactic history, the Kalari should have been completely harvested within days of the Vakari arrival. Instead, we are here because one species heard our cry for help and chose to act." Admiral Do-hyun sat in the witness chair, still wearing his battle-worn uniform, flanked by Ambassador Min-jae, who had been trying to explain humanity's actions to increasingly bewildered galactic officials. The questions had been going on for hours, and they all amounted to the same basic confusion. How could a species be simultaneously so violent and so compassionate? Counselor Veltar of the Centauri Federation leaned forward with obvious discomfort. "Admiral Do-hyun, our military, analysts estimate that your forces suffered over 30% casualties in the Vega operation. By any rational measure, the cost of your intervention far exceeded any strategic benefit humanity could have gained." Do-hyun looked at the Centauri official with the same expression he had worn when facing Gorthak's ultimatum. "Counselor, with respect, you are thinking about this wrong. We did not conduct a cost-benefit analysis before responding to the Kalari distress call. We heard that children were being murdered, and we acted. The casualties we suffered were not a cost. They were a price we were willing to pay." Ambassador Min-jae tried to smooth over his admiral's blunt response. "What Admiral Do-hyun means is that humanity places an extremely high value on protecting innocent life, regardless of species or political affiliation." "But why?" asked Counselor Keth of the Altarian Republic. "The Kalari had nothing to offer humanity. No strategic resources, no military alliance, no trade agreements. Your species gained nothing material from this intervention." Zira watched. The human ambassador struggled to explain something that seemed self-evident to every human in the chamber. How do you explain compassion to beings who think only in terms of profit and loss? How do you describe the value of saving lives to creatures who calculate everything in credits and strategic advantage? "Perhaps," Zira said quietly, "that is exactly why they did it." The chamber fell silent as every counselor turned to look at the small Kalari female. She stood up slowly, her large eyes reflecting a wisdom that came from surviving the worst kind of horror and emerging to find unexpected salvation. "For 200 years, the galaxy has known about the Vakari Syndicate," she continued. "Every species in this chamber has received reports of their activities. Every government has filed diplomatic protests. Every military has conducted threat assessments. And for 200 years, the galaxy has done nothing because stopping them would have been expensive and difficult and dangerous." Zira's voice grew stronger as she spoke, carrying the weight of millions of dead Kalari. "The humans did not calculate the cost. They did not form committees or conduct studies or file diplomatic protests. They heard our children screaming and they came to help, knowing they would die because that is who they are. Admiral Do-hyun watched the galactic counselors absorb this simple truth and felt a mixture of pride and sadness. Pride in his species and what they had accomplished. Sadness that it had taken human intervention to save the Kalari when the entire galactic community could have acted years ago. "Admiral," Counselor Veltar said carefully, "your actions have created significant diplomatic complications. The Vakari were a recognized government with territorial claims and legal standing in galactic law." "Were," Do-hyun replied simply. "They were a recognized government. Now they are space dust and bad memories." The blunt finality of his statement made several counselors shift uncomfortably in their seats. This was not how galactic politics worked. Species were not simply eliminated from existence, no matter what crimes they committed. There were always negotiations, compromises, acceptable losses balanced against political realities. Ambassador Min-jae sensed the discomfort in the chamber and stood to address the council. "Honored members, humanity recognizes that our actions in the Vega system were unusual by galactic standards. However, we want to make our position clear going forward." He activated a holographic display showing a formal document that had been prepared by the Earth government. The Terra Protection Protocol has been ratified by the human legislature and is now official policy for all Earth military forces. Any species facing extinction-level threats may request human intervention through this protocol. Counselor Keth studied the document with growing alarm. "Ambassador, this protocol essentially gives humanity the right to intervene in conflicts anywhere in the galaxy, regardless of local political considerations." "Not the right," Minji corrected. "The responsibility. We are not claiming authority over galactic affairs. We are simply stating that when innocent beings cry for help, we will answer." The implications hit the chamber like a shockwave. Humanity was declaring itself the galaxy's guardian, willing to go to war with anyone who committed genocide or mass atrocities. It was a role no species had ever claimed before, and it terrified governments who had their own questionable practices. They preferred to keep quiet. Captain Minho, recently promoted to Admiral for his role in initiating the Vega response, entered the chamber with the latest intelligence reports. The scope of human follow-up operations was staggering. 17 former syndicate facilities had been located and destroyed. Thousands of prisoners from dozens of species had been rescued and returned to their homeworlds, and the stolen neural patterns of entire extinct civilizations had been recovered and preserved. "Admiral Do-hyun," Minho reported, "the final syndicate holdouts have been eliminated. We have confirmed 0 surviving Vakari military presence in known space." The casualness of his report, announcing the complete extinction of an interstellar civilization like he was giving a weather update, made every counselor in the chamber realize they were dealing with a species unlike any they had encountered before. Later, in the reception hall, Zira found herself surrounded by human officers and crew members who wanted to meet the people they had fought to save. She was amazed by their diversity. Every age, every gender, every variation of human appearance, all united by the same basic values that had brought them across the galaxy to fight for strangers. Major Hyejin, now bearing the scars of multiple boarding actions, knelt down to speak with a group of young Kalari who had been rescued from the processing stations. Despite the language barrier, the children seemed drawn to her, sensing the same protective instinct that had driven her to risk everything for their safety. "They ask if you are their guardian angel," Zira translated as one of the youngsters, spoke in their musical language. Hyejin looked at the child with eyes that had seen too much death and too much courage. "Tell them I am just a soldier who believes some things are worth fighting for." Across the hall, Admiral Do-hyun was engaged in what appeared to be an argument with several galactic military leaders who were trying to understand human tactical doctrine. Their questions all seemed to focus on the same theme. How could any military force function when its soldiers were willing to die for complete strangers? The answer, Do-hyun explained patiently, is that they do not see them as strangers. When my Marines heard Kalari children crying for their parents, they heard their own children crying. When my ship captains saw families being torn apart, they saw their own families being threatened. That is why they fought so hard, because to them, saving the Kalari was the same as saving themselves. Ambassador Min-jae watched the interactions between humans and the various galactic representatives, and realized something profound was happening. The galaxy was trying to understand humanity through the lens of their own species' limitations and motivations. They could not comprehend a civilization that would sacrifice its own people for abstract moral principles, but the humans were changing that understanding simply by existing. Every rescued prisoner, every documented atrocity, every human who had died protecting alien children was proof that there were species in the universe capable of genuine altruism on an interstellar scale. Ambassador, Counselor Veltar approached him privately. There is something the Council needs to understand. Your Terra Protection Protocol, does it apply only to genocide and mass atrocities, or would humanity intervene in other situations? Minje considered the question carefully. Counselor, I think you are asking whether humanity would go to war over lesser crimes. The honest answer is that we do not know yet. Our response will depend on the specific circumstances and the